Tonight, Mark Carney's first move as Canada's new Prime Minister, killing the consumer carbon tax. From his new cabinet to the trade war to Donald Trump's threats.
We will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States.
Carney signals what his government will look like.
It's the same liberal gang with the same liberal agenda.
Where that leaves the opposition ahead of the election. We've got a special Friday at issue. The Bay's dire financial situation revealed nearly $1 billion in debt.
I don't know very many people who are pointing to an obvious escape for them this time.
What it means for your local store and those loyalty points. Frantic moments on a Denver tarmac, a plane's engine on fire.
The people in front of me started screaming when they saw the flames.
The terrifying evacuation that had passengers jumping off the wing.
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Thanks for joining us. Canada has a brand new Prime Minister. Mark Carney is now officially on the job, and already he's made his first big move, scrapping the controversial consumer carbon tax just hours after being sworn in. That makes good on a promise to his fellow Liberals and takes aim at a potential election issue, with that race expected to start soon. In the meantime, Carney's new cabinet faces a monumental task, steering this country through a trade war. From his cabinet choices to his remarks, the new Prime Minister is sending a message to Canadians and Donald Trump. Ashley Burke walks us through it all.
Mr. Mark Carney.
Mark Carney's big day, elected as Liberal leader in a landslide, now taking over as Prime Minister.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear.
The former central banker leading the country during a trade war. Carney appointing a smaller team, 13 men and 11 women, mostly from Justin Trudeau's past cabinets, including those involved in handling Donald Trump's tariffs, all with a sharp economic focus.
Protecting Canadian workers and their families in the face of unjustified foreign trade actions. And second, growing this great country by putting more money in Canadians' pockets.
And he's not mincing words in his response to Trump's repeated threats to make Canada the 51st state.
It's crazy. His point is crazy. That's it.
For me, it's very important to see history in the making.
This moment watched closely by a crowd who brought their own messages for Carney about how to deal with Trump.
Be more affirmative. You know, he's a good diplomat, but, you know, he has to be more than that.
We're going to stand on guard for you. We're going to stand on guard for this country, so keep strong.
Sir. Carney doesn't hold a seat in the House of Commons and is still learning his way around Parliament Hill.
I'm lost.
The new Prime Minister took a wrong turn heading into his first cabinet meeting, but when he arrived, his first order of business was to kill a key policy of his predecessor.
It's my honor, on behalf of my colleagues, to sign this order.
Carney signing an order in council to eliminate the unpopular consumer carbon tax at the end of the month, but final rebate checks will still go out in April.
This is a cabinet that's focused on action.
I call it the carbon tax con job.
The Conservatives suggesting this is all just an election ploy.
He's going to hide the consumer carbon tax for 60 days. And if he's reelected, he'll bring it back bigger than ever with no rebate.
Well, the NDP says Carney's showing his true colors.
A Mark Carney government is a race to the right between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, and it's a race where workers lose.
Carney's cabinet includes François-Philippe Champagne being promoted to finance minister, Dominic LeBlanc adding international trade to his intergovernmental affairs portfolio, and Melanie Joly staying on as Minister of Foreign Affairs.
And Ashley, Carney's new government making another move tonight.
The Defense Minister Bill Blair told CBC's Power to Politics that Canada is considering scrapping all or part of a deal to buy U.S.-made F-35 jets. The government signed a contract in 2023 to purchase 88 for $19 billion. But since this trade war started, Canadians have been calling on the government to kill the deal. Now Canada is going to be looking at other options like European suppliers.
Okay, Ashley Burke in Ottawa. Let's bring in Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton now. Rosie, let's zero in on that swift move to kill the consumer carbon tax.
Yeah, Erica, I mean, we knew this was going to happen, right? Prime Minister Carney got chosen by Liberals partly because of this promise, but it was extraordinary to see cameras inside the cabinet room, to see him sign that executive order to kill this controversial and divisive tax in his very first act as Prime Minister. And, I should say, to commit to still giving Canadians the rebate, at least in this upcoming quarter. This is a skillful political move on day one, and it left Pierre Poilievre, the leader who effectively won the debate on the usefulness of a carbon tax, grasping at how to criticize Carney's move, accusing him of hiding the tax elsewhere. But if Carney wanted to demonstrate that this is an action-oriented government, he sure did that right out of the gate.
Well, this speaks to what Carney wants the cabinet to demonstrate. Yeah,
that it is a cabinet meant to signal that this is a serious time. It was not a day of ceremony and excitement, as we sometimes see at these cabinet swearing-ins. It was a day of, you got your new job, here are your tasks, now get down to work. And it was, like, frankly, a little bit dull. The problem for Prime Minister Carney is that he's working with a deck of cards that was handed to him by Justin Trudeau. So the ability to make really significant changes to cabinet is limited. There are a lot of familiar faces here. And if you're trying to prove that you're different, that is definitely a challenge. This cabinet also has to offer some continuity in the face of Donald Trump and show that Prime Minister Carney is going to do this job differently. So this was a difficult task for him today.
All right, thanks for this, Rosie. And you'll be back in about 20 minutes or so with a special edition of At Issue. As Carney moves to kill the federal consumer carbon tax, BC's premier says it's following suit.
Our commitment was, once the federal government removed the backstop that required us to have it, we would get rid of it too. And that work is well underway, and we will be ending the carbon tax here in British Columbia.
EB's legislation is set to cancel the planned increase on April 1st. BC's carbon tax currently adds more than 17 cents per litre to regular gasoline for consumers. As Mark Carney's cabinet was sworn in, threats to Canada's sovereignty continued, this time on Canadian soil. Kate McKenna shows us the uncomfortable end to the G7 meeting and Canada's response.
Posing for a photo, Canada and the U.S. appeared as close as ever. But one question has dogged America's top diplomat.
Mr. Rubio, is it appropriate for a G7 member to threaten the sovereignty of another G7 member?
Repeatedly pressed by U.S. reporters on Canadian soil, Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended Donald Trump's position on annexation.
The president has made his argument as to why he thinks Canada would be better off joining the United States for economic purposes. There's a disagreement between the president's position and the position of the Canadian government.
Canada's foreign minister says it's more than a disagreement, it's a non-starter.
What I said to the secretary is Canada's sovereignty is not up to debate, period.
To be honest with you, Canada only works as a state.
Canada's allies have been slow to respond publicly. Sitting next to Donald Trump, the head of NATO stayed silent as the U.S. president doubled down on absorbing Canada.
We're masters in our own home. We're in charge.
The Prime Minister says Canada can stick up for itself.
It's always nice when people say nice things about you, but we don't need it. We're not seeking it.
For me, it's not my job, but for me, Canada will be Canada over the next years.
Still, some countries showed solidarity. Foreign ministers wore maple leaf pins given to them by Canada, and some even wore red and white.
We Europeans, we Germans, and Canada are not only partners, we are close friends.
I recognise that there has been anxiety here in Canada at this time. How could I not with Canadian family? But I'm absolutely clear that Canada will remain and continue to be a proud sovereign nation.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is traveling to Europe next week, shoring up trade and security relationships abroad in a world where Canada's closest neighbour is less reliable. Kate McKenna, CBC News, La Malbaie, Quebec.
In a speech at the U.S. Department of Justice, Donald Trump threatened to purge disloyal elements in the government.
We will expel the rogue actors and corrupt forces from our government. We will expose and very much expose their egregious crimes and severe misconduct, of which was levels you've never seen anything like it. It's going to be legendary.
Trump has already fired officials involved in investigations against him, including for his alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 election. He also suggested today that negative news coverage of him should be illegal. Investigators are trying to work out what caused an American Airlines plane to burst into flames on the tarmac in Denver, leaving passengers to scramble for safety. Katie Nicholson shows us another terrifying mishap that nearly became an aviation disaster.
It's the last thing anyone wants to see before a flight. On the tarmac, an engine in flames. Frantic passengers crowded together on the wing, barely visible in billows of smoke. Helen Prager, a retired flight attendant, was on board.
The engine made a really bad noise and the plane shook. And I was like, whoa, this was literally on takeoff. I'm like, something's wrong.
The Boeing 737-800, destined for Dallas, turned toward Denver. It landed safely and taxied to the gate, and then...
Orderly, orderly! The people in front of me started screaming when they saw the flames, and then the people started rushing towards the rear to get out.
12 people were taken to hospital with injuries, but all 178 people on board made it off alive. It's been a rough year for air travel. Numerous incidents, including January's mid-air collision between a plane and a military chopper in D.C., killing 67 people. And last month's terrifying roof skid landing in Toronto.
What is going to be difficult for the NTSB and everyone else, Secretary of Transportation, trying to fix the problem, is each one of these accidents has had a different cause.
Investigators will now have to find out what caused the engine to rattle in the air and ultimately catch fire at the gate.
What the NTSB is really going to be interested in focusing is those few minutes where we normally are shutting the fuel off. What was going on during that period of time, and why was fuel still being fed to this engine, and how did it catch on fire?
And as terrifying as these images are,
the system worked. Everyone's training came through. The airplanes were designed to hold together, and everything worked, and people survived.
Something for nervous flyers to hold on to. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
In Washington, aviation authorities announced new restrictions after that deadly mid-air crash. In January, a plane collided with an Army helicopter, killing everyone on board. At Reagan National Airport, part of a helicopter route is now permanently closed. Plus, non-essential helicopter and passenger jet traffic will not be mixed. Breaking tonight, Hudson's Bay says it will start liquidating its entire business as soon as next week, unless it can secure financing. New court filings show that the Canadian retailer is deep in debt, owing nearly $1 billion to creditors. As Anis Haidari shows us, customers and workers could be left in the cold.
Shoppers here already know the Bay is out of money.
I really like Hudson's Bay and how they did try to pivot to really cater to the younger market. They did try, but the competition is steep out here.
So, I mean, I think it'll be a game changer, to be honest. Like, it's a big part of Canada's history.
New court filings show the Bay only has $3 million on hand, compared to debt of nearly $1 billion.
I feel sorry for the employees. I've just talking to several of them inside there, and they're worried. And the worker always comes out last in these sort of situations.
So far, the company says it can pay its more than 9,000 workers, but if or when there are job losses, severance often goes unpaid under creditor protection. HBC owes big money to nearly 2,000 suppliers. Chanel, more than $5.5 million. Estee Lauder, more than $9 million. Ralph Lauren, more than $16 million. But also on the unpaid list, escalator and elevator repair.
It's a very large one. The creditor claims are in the range of $1 billion.
Insolvency experts are watching what they call a huge case.
While it is monumental, I think we were probably expecting it. There have been a lot of retailer filings in the last several years.
It's a dramatic fall for Canada's oldest retailer. Pivoting to online wasn't enough to replace dropping physical sales.
Canadians have significantly changed their habits over the last 10 years, and particularly since the pandemic.
There's speculation the Bay will need to close up to half of its stores, but retail watchers say that might not be enough.
I don't know very many people who are pointing to an obvious escape for them this time.
As for customers, the shopping bag is mixed. Gift cards work for now, but rewards points don't. Just like the escalator repairman, they aren't getting paid out. Anis Haydari, CBC News, Calgary.
An Ontario man has pleaded guilty to stealing a famous portrait of Winston Churchill, replacing it with a fake that went unnoticed for months. Our Paul Hunter was in court today as the thief explained why he did it.
Mr. Wood, do you have anything to say before the hearing? Let's leave this down, but thank you.
Jeffrey Wood, the Ontario man accused in one of the most notorious art heists Canada has ever seen. The brazen theft of this, an original print of the Roaring Lion, Yusuf Karsh's 1941 photo of former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. It's one of the most renowned such portraits on the planet. Stolen from its place on the walls of the Fairmont Chateau Laurier Hotel in Ottawa more than 3 years ago. Replaced on the wall by this fake, going unnoticed for months. The theft led Ottawa police eventually to Italy last fall, where it was recovered after being sold at auction in the UK.
How are you feeling, madame?
Very good. Today's the day.
Hotel General Manager Geneviève Dumas told the court, in her view, the portrait is irreplaceable. But it was Wood who took center stage at the hearing. He pleaded guilty to theft, forgery, and trafficking stolen goods. The Crown reading into the record fresh details of his crime. The court heard police found DNA on duct tape on the back of the fake, later matching Wood's DNA, recovered from a toothbrush obtained in a search warrant. Wood's lawyer, Lawrence Greenspan, suggested to the court, despite the portrait's fame, it's just a print made from a negative, nothing special, though the judge seemed to push back on that. Then, a moment of drama. Wood himself stood up, apologized profusely for what he called his heinous crime, telling the court he stole it simply for money, to help his brother suffering deep mental illness.
So much from the heart. His apologies were something that were entirely his own, and his explanation as to motive, I think this was not a crime of greed, it was a crime of love.
Though Dumas had her own opinion.
So the suspect did provide some excuses, accepted. It doesn't change anything in the story. We're just hoping that April 14, the result will be significant.
Dumas mentioned April 14th. Erica, that's the date set aside for sentencing. The Crown wants 2 years less a day. The defense wants a suspended sentence.
Okay, but Paul, the other big question is, how did he do it? How did he steal this portrait right in plain sight?
We may never know, Erica. Mr. Wood did not explain that today, nor does he have to. But look, the bottom line is the portrait is back on the wall in that building where it belongs. The how did he do it part may well remain a mystery forever.
All right, thank you, Paul. Paul Hunter in Ottawa tonight. As Canada retaliates against Donald Trump's tariffs, some small businesses are getting caught in the crossfire.
It's a terrible gut punch is what it feels like.
How counter-tariffs are hurting companies in this country, next. Plus, mapping the seafloor in Antarctica.
No one ready there, Gordon.
Correct this bridge. You have permission to launch the USVs when ready, over.
Susan Ormiston is with the Canadian Research Mission. And later, a new mom makes her vote count.
People can participate in democracy no matter where we're at.
The BC MLA who showed up just hours after giving birth. We're back in 2.
There he is.
Boo! Those are the boos U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and the Second Lady received last night at Washington's Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Their arrival at the Symphony forced audience members to receive Secret Service checks, delaying a program of all-Russian music. Small businesses are feeling the brunt of Canada's counter-tariffs, making U.S. products more expensive to import. As Sophia Harris shows us, most companies approve of the retaliation, even as costs pile up.
Troyan Santos checks the federal government's latest counter-tariffs online and gets bad news.
I think everything that we sell is under this code.
The goods she sells at her lacrosse equipment store in Pickering, Ontario, are included in the list.
It's a terrible gut punch is what it feels like.
Last week, the government announced its first round of 25% retaliatory tariffs on American goods, including many food products. On Thursday, Canada hit the U.S. with a second round, which includes steel, aluminum, and sports equipment. Santos buys almost all her lacrosse gear from the U.S.
We have shipments that are coming in on a daily basis, so this will affect us immediately. We're going to have to increase our prices to reflect that 25% increase.
The retaliatory tariffs may also pose hurdles for this fast food chain, which has big expansion plans. The problem? Each location needs up to 8 deep fryers, which are made of steel and shipped from the U.S.
That's a lot of chicken.
So the chain's CEO presumes they're included in Canada's counter-tariffs.
Fryers are our bread and butter. Unfortunately, Canada does not manufacture any of its own fryers. Overall, just not a good situation for us.
How concerning are counter-tariffs for your members?
They're very concerning.
This economist with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says many small businesses could be affected. Even so, he says support for Canadians' retaliatory tariffs is strong.
We weren't expecting the support for counter tariffs to be so high among small business owners. But I think it comes from a sense that something needs to be done.
As a citizen, as a naturalized citizen, we will bite the bullet for our adopted country.
The question now is, for how long will that widespread support continue if the trade war drags on? Sophia Harris, CBC News, Vancouver.
A Canadian mission in Antarctica is looking for answers about climate change deep beneath the surface.
So that essentially sends a pulse of sound down to the seafloor.
What scientists are trying to learn from the undersea operation. And after the break, Rosie's here with At Issue.
Hi, Erica. Tonight we're going to talk, obviously, about Prime Minister Mark Carney and his new cabinet.
Canada's new government is changing how we work so we can deliver better results faster to all Canadians.
What will Carney's government mean for Canadians and Canada's relationship with Donald Trump? Andrew, Althea, and Aaron Wary join me to talk about that and more.
Heavy rainfall has caused widespread flooding and landslides in Italy's Tuscany region. Several rivers have overflowed, turning streets into torrents of mud and flooding homes. Schools and parks are closed as crews work to rescue people trapped by the rising waters. Almost a month's worth of rain fell in Florence Friday morning. The world's top ocean mapping scientists on board a Canadian Navy ship are trying to get a sense of what's happening below the surface in the Antarctic. International climate correspondent Susan Ormiston was there too, along with the team from New Brunswick.
No one ready there, Gordon.
Contact this bridge. You have permission to launch the USVs when ready, over.
Science at Sea is a heart-pumping project.
Get that hook up!
With the Navy crew trying to launch Kevin Wilcox's remote-controlled boat.
Once we get free, we'll take her back.
But our boat gets too close to the bow.
Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!
Sorry about that. We were getting right underneath the transom. I didn't want anybody's head getting hit.
The unmanned surface vehicle is part of the University of New Brunswick's Ocean Mapping Group. It even has a mascot, Pingachu.
So ping like a sonar. The most important is the sonar that's underneath. And so that essentially sends a pulse of sound down to the seafloor.
100 times a minute, creating a picture of the bottom of the sea.
So we have a map over here that has data that's been collected from other groups. So I'm essentially going to be driving the USV back and forth and essentially painting in this area of the seafloor.
As the Antarctic warms and the glaciers dump more fresh water into the salty seawater, scientists want to know what happens to ocean life. This work fits into a bigger picture. Only about 25% of the world's oceans are mapped, and there's a push on to get it all done. But as you can see, it's incremental and challenging. On shore, it may not look like much, but this connects to an undersea cable, part of an observatory which reads the ocean's vitals, temperature, pressure, and salinity every day.
And so that's was put in by Ocean Networks Canada in a collaboration with the Spanish for this location.
The Yellow Explorer is working away. The seabed map is starting to fill in, but suddenly, trouble.
Surprisingly, there's kelp here, which...
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. And so that got caught up in my motors, essentially. And we've cleared that, but unfortunately, they're still not responding.
Attempts to fix it fail. So it's back to Mothership to triage the problem. And he still has to get his vehicle back on board the Margaret Brooke.
Okay, heads up to the boat.
USB is clear of the water.
Safely stored. Turns out it was just a fuse. He's relieved.
All the challenges, I do it all over again.
Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Espanola Cove, Antarctica.
Now, let's break down an historic day in Canadian politics. Rosie is here with a special edition of At Issue.
At issue tonight, the Carney era. Mark Carney is sworn in as the 24th Prime Minister and unveiled his smaller cabinet to respond to Donald Trump's trade war.
Canada's new government will be action-oriented, driven by a smaller but highly experienced team made to meet the moment we are in.
So what does Mark Carney's cabinet tell us about his priorities? What will they mean for Canada's response to Donald Trump? I'm Rosemary Barton here to break it down. The beginning of the Mark Carney era on At Issue tonight. Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Aaron Wary is in for Chantal Hébert. Good to see you all for a second night, and Aaron, to see you again. So a much smaller cabinet, as we predicted, sending some strong signals about things, and his first move today to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. Andrew, just give me your thoughts initially on what you saw in the cabinet in terms of the size and who he has tapped to fill some pretty important roles.
Well, it's a lot more stand pat than I think we were necessarily given to understand beforehand. The hype beforehand was it might be under 20 ministers. You heard rumors that there would be all sorts of star candidates unveiled, or maybe even a conservative or a New Democrat. In the end, what you got is 24, which is certainly smaller than the bloated cabinet we had before. It takes us back to the early days of the Chrétien era, which is not exactly prehistory. And it's drawn, as the Conservatives were quick to point out, almost entirely from the existing cabinet. Only 3 new faces in the cabinet. I think only 3 or 4 who were dropped from the cabinet. But of course, you didn't have to do much in the way of change because so many ministers had already either resigned or signaled that they weren't running again. So to get down from 36 or 37 or whatever it was down to 24, it didn't take a lot of hacking and hewing. And so, yeah, you've got some of the main ministers who were handling some of these files to do with Donald Trump, particularly, staying in their portfolios, probably appropriately. Probably this is not the time to be making major changes there. The only really significant, change in portfolios was François-Philippe Champagne taking over at Finance, possibly predictably. In the end, what you get is maybe a slight tilt to a more centrist perception than the more left of center Trudeau cabinets, but much more stand pat and much more conventional than I think possibly some of us were hoping or some were fearing.
Very consolidated departments, though, and a lot of the language in terms of what those ministers' titles are does signal, I think, Althea, what Andrew's talking about, a move further into the center and away from some of the more progressive language that Justin Trudeau would have used. But give me your thoughts.
I guess on that front, there are a few indications that that's where he wanted to go, or at least was trying to position himself, but still kind of protecting the left flank. Yeah. I think, the fact that Karina Gould, there's no room for her in this cabinet is noteworthy. But there are still progressives in that cabinet. Patty Hajdu, for example, is not a blue liberal at all. No. Neither is Nate Erskine-Smith. So they didn't make room. Yeah, for... Well, Mr. Guilbeault, I think at some point, as the Conservative pointed out today, has once described himself as a socialist. So yes, there is room for people that are on the center left, even on the left, to be part of Mr. Carney's team. I think that the fact that he decided not to have a gender-balanced cabinet is perhaps a signal that he is different than Justin Trudeau, that he's not going to be consumed with identity issues. But caveat, he did include somebody who was never in cabinet, the chief whip there's no reason why we need to have a cheap whip in cabinet. Parliament is not even sitting. And he gave that job to the former small business minister. And had he not done that, we would not have 48% of women in the cabinet. We would have 43% of women in the cabinet. And so probably there would be more people who would be raising this as an issue. So I think in that way, they were little symbols. I also think maybe he kept too many of the old Justin Trudeau ministers. Like, yes, Dominic LeBlanc, Melanie Joly, that makes sense. But did you need to keep David McGuinty? Did you need to keep Stephen McKinnon? Did you need to keep I mean, probably they would have been there anyways, but it just struck me as they made a conscious decision to keep people. And maybe, we never talk about this, but maybe that's a security-related thing. You can't vet people properly with the short time that they had. So I do wonder is this really a temporary cabinet and there will be a very different looking cabinet if the Liberals win in the next election? Maybe.
What message do you think he was trying to send with it, Aaron, in terms of message to Canadians about what kind of Prime Minister he is going to be?
I mean, I think the main message he wanted to convey was simply change. I think he used the word new about 12 times in his opening statement, even referred to Canada's new government, which sounds like a bit of a throwback to the Harper years, actually. I think, working with caucus or, working within caucus, if he wasn't going to go out and find unelected cabinet ministers, he could only do so much. I think, what he did, there were some fairly significant moves. Obviously Chrystia Freeland is back, but she's in, a relatively secondary role. Stephen Guilbeault is out at Environment. Mark Miller, Justin Trudeau's boyhood friend, is out of cabinet entirely. I think, though, that the larger idea of change, if he's going to represent that, is going to be more in sort of what goes on outside of his cabinet picks, right? I mean, I think just listening to him in a news conference, it's pretty apparent that we're not dealing with Justin Trudeau anymore. Noting that I don't believe there was any hugging going on today at the swearing in is a sign that we're not dealing with Justin Trudeau anymore. But I think this really is going to come back to the actions he takes now. Yeah. We saw a bit of that later in the afternoon, and I think that's more than what we get out of this cabinet. And I think Althea is right. There's a big question here of whether this is really the cabinet or whether this is the cabinet for now. It's going to be in the policy choices and the ideas that he brings forward.
Andrew, yeah.
I'm not even clear whether this is the cabinet for now, but there's other shoes to drop, surely. So there's no mention, for example, of women and gender equity. There's no mention of the regional development agencies. But unless I'm wrong,
that's inherited, and these are going back to industry and innovation.
Yeah, some of them are put inside departments, but go on to your point.
Well, I just wonder whether at some point we're going to find there's going to be ministers of state that will be responsible for these things, either before the election or after the election, most likely after the election. Will this actually be the cabinet that's going to govern the country, or is this just to get them through the next couple of weeks?
Well, let's talk about the action, because that's the other word that he used a lot. We're action-oriented. We're focused on doing things. And he did sort of have a let's get down to business approach to today, I think, Althea. The fact that he did sign an order to get rid of the consumer carbon tax, keep the rebate in place at least for one more quarter, how significant is that in terms of signaling a break with Justin Trudeau?
Well, this day was all about imagery. I mean, it's not really that much about substance. And the image that came out was what he called an experience instead of an old cabinet, an experienced cabinet, and a day where he got things done. It's a lean cabinet that is action-oriented, and so he needed to show something, I think. Yeah. So what he did is really just, through regulation, bring down the price to zero. So the carbon tax basically doesn't exist. But eventually, if the Liberals are reelected, they will have to change the law, repeal the law, so they don't open themselves up to lawsuits. Yeah. But it does effectively get rid of the carbon tax. And he ran on that. So you can say, promise made, promise delivered. He takes away the largest baton that Pierre Poilievre has been using for the last 2 years, clobbering Justin Trudeau on the head with. And even ministers that, were not super keen with this idea of getting rid of the consumer price, everybody was suggesting that, they basically had lost the war and they needed to move on, and they would try to find other ways of making their emission targets.
Yeah, Aaron, on that point?
Yeah, I think if you go back to 2015, the first act of the Trudeau government was at least symbolically announcing that they were bringing back the long-form census.
That's right.
Feels like a long time ago now. Yeah. But that, I think, is sort of a comparison point for this. It's a sort of big gesture right off the bat to say this is not the previous government. It does raise questions for the Liberals for the other parties as well about what you're going to do instead. But it may be, we can talk about the demise of the carbon tax forever, but it may be at this point had to go so that there could be a real debate about climate policy in this country and get back to or get to some kind of conversation about what exactly these parties are going to do in terms of emissions rather than whether or not they were for or against the carbon tax.
Just like 30 seconds to you, Andrew, on that.
Well, the sad and bizarre part is it's not as if people are not, unless we don't have any carbon policy at all, there's going to be a carbon policy. It will cost things and it will cost consumers. Only there won't be a rebate anymore. So the idea that we're actually going to be letting people out of some sort of hardship as a result of this is completely bogus. It's going to mean we're going to have a more expensive, less efficient system without rebates that ultimately the cost will get passed on to consumers. They just won't know it. And that is basically what the compromise, the agreement that's been made amongst all the parties now is, let's just keep the public in the dark.
Okay, we're going to leave this here, but when we come back, we'll talk about how Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, the opposition parties are responding to Mark Carney and his new cabinet.
People are worried about losing their jobs, and what Mark Carney has shown is that he has not made a priority a lot of the people in our country.
That's a preview of how Conservatives and NDP preparing their attacks for the Carney era of government. That's next. At issue, new dynamic. With a new Prime Minister and a new cabinet, opposition leaders are previewing their attacks for the Carney Liberals.
A Mark Carney government is a race to the right between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre.
Today, Liberals are trying to trick Canadians into electing them for a fourth term in power with a cabinet that is 87% the same as Trudeau's cabinet.
So how are opposition parties realigning and preparing for an election with Mark Carney at the helm of the Liberals? Let's bring everybody back. Andrew, Althea, and Aaron. Althea, I'll start with you here. What did you make of the response and the attempt to, I mean, they've obviously been preparing for this, but now here they are faced with Mark Carney as Prime Minister and this cabinet. What did you make of the response?
Unimpressive. I'm actually quite surprised that they didn't try harder to find more wedge issues. So the two main messages we heard from Jagmeet Singh was on Karina Gould being left out and basically suggesting that there's no space for progressives in Mr. Carney's cabinet. We will see whether the policies match the action, but I think he can point to other people, as I mentioned before, in his cabinet to say, no, there is room for them. And then quibbling over the title of Steve McKinnon's new combined portfolio, which was labor and employment, and now is called jobs and families. The fact that labor is no longer there, Mr. Singh was arguing that this says that there's no room for unions and there's no room for the workers. We're just talking about jobs. I don't know if Canadians are really going to see it that way. And for Mr. Poilievre, he was talking about how for the first time, he used the word the rebate. We heard him talk about the carbon pricing rebate. I don't know if it's the very first time, it's the first time I've noticed it. And then there won't be a rebate? What? This rebate that you seem to forget existed for the last, 6 years, suddenly you're going to miss it? And he also talked about this being a law and that Mr. Carney could not do this without repealing the law. Well, actually, he could. So, it's like you're kind of misleading the public. It's you're holding on to the old arguments. It's time to move on. Like they're not running against Justin Trudeau anymore. The landscape has changed. They're the old. They're the tired and old, and he's the brand new shiny thing, and they need to find a better line of attack. And I do not think that either party have landed on something that works.
Yeah, I have to say, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Althea, Aaron. I was struck by how much it just sounded the same, that there's no new line of attack, because certainly there are weaknesses to go after here, but they don't seem to have seized on them or settled on them yet, at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jagmeet Singh went for the easy ones on day one to say, there's no minister of gender equality here, there's no minister of youth, there's no minister of diversity. Those charges could amount to something if the Liberal platform seems short in those areas. For the Conservatives, they still feel like they're in a spot where they're kind of just throwing stuff against the wall to see what works. And they haven't quite figured out how to deal with Mark Carney. The argument that he is sort of more of the same, there's something to that Mark Carney can't come in and say, the last 9.5 years didn't happen, or, I don't have to account for them. He can't completely separate himself from those things. But the idea that Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau are the same person, I just don't know that voters are going to accept that.
Yeah. Andrew, what did you make of how they responded?
Well, they did seem to be a bit flummoxed, I think partly because it in the end was a fairly cautious cabinet change. The best thing Jagmeet Singh could come up with was you called it jobs instead of labor. Yves Blanchet said the problem was there wasn't enough ministers from the Quebec City area, which is not the strongest complaint you can make about a cabinet. And while Pierre Poilievre had the strongest point of saying, yeah, this is mostly just the same Liberal cabinet, so where's the big change here? That got lost a lot. He started wandering into all kinds of, as Aaron said, throwing everything he could think of to stick. So, there was just a lot of loose talk, frankly, being thrown around that I don't think is really advancing his case, particularly if we're into a contest of leaders and who can show mature judgment and leadership in a time of crisis. He still seems in the mode of let's tear down as much as we can the opponent rather than trying to build himself up as a prime minister in waiting.
Yeah, go ahead, Althea. Yeah.
That's about feeding like the conspiracy theories on social media so that they can run off with a theory that Mark Carney was elected in a completely undemocratic way, which is actually the way things are done in this country. And it is normal in the circumstance that the prime minister has not been elected by everybody. And he will face the electorate, but they're feeding that. And you see that echoed by Conservative MPs, amplifying that message, retweeting that message. And so I think that he is doing that to feed other people to run with that on the internet.
Sure.
But it's one step beyond that, which is the thing he's got himself into talking about was only 150,000 of the 400,000 registered Liberal members voted. There must be something suspicious about that. Now, he prefaced that by saying it may just be that there's a lack of enthusiasm, which would be a more traditional and tenable attack you could make on your opponent. But to even go near there of saying, well, there was something suspicious about that, I don't think showed great judgment.
Yeah, to invent something or infer something, as you point out, has no evidence to back it up at all. Last point to you, Althea, on what that tells you about where Pierre Poilievre is at in terms of understanding how to take on Carney.
I think both the NDP and the Conservatives believe that Mr. Carney's personal wealth and success will can be portrayed as a handicap. Yeah. For the NDP, he doesn't know how regular people live, and he's not in it for you. He's really out there to protect CEOs and other multimillionaires. And for Mr. Poilievre, it is about the conflicts of interest. The most critical thing was actually said from François-Philippe Champagne, the new finance minister, where he talked about this was a brand new era, a new era of financial sustainability. And then at the same time, in the same sentence, he said, and now we're going to invest more. We're going to invest everywhere. Like, you can't do both things, really. So I feel like this is an area of vulnerability that also sounds a lot like Justin Trudeau 2015. And so they themselves don't seem to have settled on a message beyond Canada Strong that they're going to bring to the electorate at the moment. Or if so, maybe the ministers are all freelance.
Andrew, Althea, Aaron, thank you for stepping in. That is at issue after a historic day in Canadian politics. Now back to Erica in Vancouver.
Thanks, Rosie. Coming up, a BC politician casts her vote hours after giving birth.
Both sides of the House gave me and our newest little British Columbia a full standing ovation.
And MLA's multitasking moment next. You're looking at Darlene Rochford, an MLA for a Vancouver Island riding, seen here taking part in a budget vote hours after she gave birth. To celebrate the arrival of her little one, the Chamber gave them both a standing ovation. And tonight, her milestone makes our moment.
Yesterday, I had the pleasure of welcoming this little bean, Josephine Catherine Ellen Rochford, into the world at 6:24 approximately in the morning. And then I was at our first vote of the day in the House. Both sides of the House, to be fair, gave me and our newest little British Columbia a full standing ovation. It was pretty spectacular, I got to say. I think it shows that we're at a place where we can support families, really, that people can participate in democracy no matter where we're at. Coming from a government who supports working people, I can truly say every part of my journey, whether it was before I got elected during the campaign or after, everyone has been nothing but supportive. I'm pretty happy that it was there, and this little one down the road will get to also watch it and see that she was made part of history. So that's pretty cool.
No doubt, very impressive and pretty important she showed up too, because it was a confidence vote. So if it didn't pass, it could have forced the provincial government to dissolve and triggered an election. So she was there and she voted not once, she voted later that afternoon as well. So that is commitment, and congratulations from all of us at the National. Thank you for being with us tonight. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Erica Johnson in Vancouver. Take care.